welcome to Being Human. I'm Barbara Caines. Our show is about humanism, the philosophy that maintains the ultimate quest is to know ourselves and understand the world around us. Today's guest is Matt Cherry. We will talk about the movement that is promoting humanism. He's a representative of the International Humanist and Ethical Union, whose position is represented at the United Nations. He's from Albany, New York, and he's asked me to call him Matt.
Humanism encourages people to think for themselves, to examine their beliefs, and to ensure they are supported by evidence, to make decisions based on reason and compassion.
Later on, Matt and I will be discussing the issues that humanists are working on at the United Nations. And welcome back. Matt is with the International Humanist and Ethical Union. Matt, how does the world look to humanists?
The world looks very exciting right now to humanists. I think we're seeing the triumph of humanism in many ways in the West with the success of democratic societies and the growth of science and universal education, but we're also seeing those ideas spreading to the rest of the world and creating a lot of conflict and confusion in other parts of the world.
Explain a little bit about the differences when it comes to humanism in the West versus the East.
A lot of the battles we see with humanists fighting for human rights in the global South and in Asia and elsewhere are battles that we fought in North America and Europe decades or even centuries ago. So we're seeing countries where we have theocratic regimes, and humanists are fighting to create open societies where there's a separation of religion and state. We're seeing countries where they do not accept ideas of democracy or human rights, and humanists are having to fight to overcome those. And we're also seeing in many countries that may have more open societies a huge growth in very, to us, reactionary religion. Religious ideas of a belief in miracles and superstitions. We have people working for us in Africa who deal a lot with witch hunts, where people are literally hunted down and killed because people believe they're practicing witchcraft. So we're seeing a lot of conflicts which we in the West thought were in the past, but are flaring up all over the world again.
And what are some of the complications that you're encountering in the West?
Some of the changes in the West have been very interesting because in a sense I think there was a certain complacency because when we do talk about those things we say, well, we in the West have already been through this. But in fact we're seeing some new conflicts over the separation of religion and state. We're seeing a lot of people coming from different parts of the world who have different ideas about how they should follow their religion and how they should be able to impose their religious beliefs on their family or other people in their community. So we're seeing some increase in some of the issues which I think in the past in Canada and elsewhere we thought we had resolved.
What do you do in that situation?
I think it's an ongoing struggle, but the fact that we have had success in many countries in bringing together different communities and allowing those different communities to flourish because we have an open society that accepts that people can have their own private beliefs as long as they don't try and impose it on everyone else, has allowed Canada and other countries to have very successful and diverse societies. And I think we sometimes have to go back to those standards that allow us to maintain our diversity without allowing different groups to control their own communities in the name of religion.
Explain a little bit about humanism as a philosophy and humanism as a movement/organization.
Right, that's a great question because we often talk about humanism as a general belief in human rights and a rejection of the supernatural, but when it comes down to organized humanism, you're talking about communities that allow people to get involved in following their own beliefs as humanists and meeting some of their needs as humanists. So we actually have organizations that provide, in a sense, an alternative to some of the services that religions provide. For example, humanists will conduct weddings and baby namings and funerals. Humanists will provide moral education for children and conduct some of the traditional, what you might call pastoral services that religions provide. But then humanist groups also act as a basis for action to kind of champion the causes we believe in, such as human rights and separation of religion and state.
Can you be a humanist and also be associated, attached to a religion?
I think a lot of humanists actually do belong to religious organizations because they find them to be effective vehicles for championing their causes, and also because most people, to be honest, are involved in religion because they were born into it. Most people adhere to the religion that their parents had, that they were raised in. And often they start to reject some of the theology and they move away from the doctrines, but they still feel comfortable in those traditions, in the cultural sense, and also in the community it provides, even though they reject, the metaphysics and the theology. So there are a lot of humanists who belong to churches and synagogues and other religious groups. However, I think you have to reject that theology if you are ready to be a humanist. If you still believe that God tells you what to do, then you're not following a humanist morality.
Humanists have critics. What are they saying that is right, and what are they saying that is wrong?
I think a lot of the criticism of humanism is just based on a disagreement, a profound disagreement with where we stand. I mean, if you really do believe in a personal God who has told you what to do, then you're going to find humanism not only threatening, but something you violently disagree with. And I think those kind of disagreements are areas where we're going to have to agree to disagree. Because if you believe that God is telling you what to do, you're never going to agree with a humanist view of what you should do. However, I think we can find grounds where we can agree to go our own separate ways and disagree agreeably.
What's your message, or what kind of help can you give somebody who's torn?
I think if you're unsure about things, the humanist message always, in any situation, is think it through, follow your own questions, work out your own answers. Don't accept other people's answers. Work it out for yourself and work out what is effective for you.
So what are humanists doing presently to accommodate and work with others that have a more conservative point of view or that totally different point of view?
Sure. Well, humanism has a wide range of opinions and principles we work for. So we often find that on some issues we find common cause with one group, and then on another issue we'll disagree with them completely. So for example, we may work with many liberal religious groups in support of ideas of self-determination, about giving people the freedom to make their own decisions in areas such as reproductive rights or the right to die in euthanasia, and we may find common cause with some religious groups on those. In other areas, we may disagree with those liberal religious groups, but find common cause elsewhere. Even with the most profoundly conservative religious groups, we often agree that they should have a right to follow their religion, and if they will agree that we should have our right to follow our beliefs, then we've got common ground now.
What do you think could happen to the world if humanism was embraced?
That is a huge question because it's never going to be embraced in one foul swoop. Obviously, these things happen over generations. But I think as more people turn to humanism, first of all, more people will find a positive source for their own values and for letting go of some of the guilt and repression that comes with religion and being able to fulfill their own personal potential based on humanist ideas of reason and compassion. And secondly, I think as societies change to reflect that, we'll find that societies are more prosperous in the broadest sense of allowing people to flourish, and also that societies will be more peaceful as we remove many of the sources of conflict between groups and individuals.
What 3 things does Matt Cherry want to accomplish in his lifetime as a humanist, realistically?
Realistically, okay. One thing that's very important to me because of my personal history, and I'm the child of a non-religious family, but I went to a state church school because that was the only local state school available. And one thing that's very important to me and is a important cause for the humanist movement is to end state support for religious schools. I support the right for religions to have their own schools, but the government should not be in the job of funding religious division. And I think any religious school is dividing children, is dividing communities, and is dividing people. So I would like to see the end of all state funding for religious schools or religious indoctrination. Secondly, I would like to see all of the governments, all of the states in the world recognize human equality, the rights of every individual. And those ideas are broadly accepted in principle. They're not that revolutionary anymore. The idea of universal human rights, that everyone is equal irrespective of their personal beliefs, their colors, their creed, their sex, their sexuality. I'd like to see all governments recognize that in law. And thirdly, and most ambitiously, building on that, to actually move beyond the letter of the law and see those ideas recognized by all individuals, where we respect everyone irrespective of their differences and their beliefs and their gender and their sexuality.
I think after a lot of the things you've just mentioned, people may be wondering, hey, am I a humanist? How can they discover if they are? How will they know?
I think if they're asking if they're a humanist, there's a very good chance that they are. And one of the things I have found, I've been involved in humanism for maybe 20 years. And before that, even as a child and as a teenager, I held humanist beliefs. I just didn't know there was a name for it. Mm-hmm. And it was only after getting a degree in philosophy and after getting a job that I realized that these values I had worked out for myself had a name, and that name was humanism. So I think a lot of the people watching will have a similar experience, where they worked out their own views by following their own questions, by reading up on science and working things out, and they never knew it was humanism. And I think they'll find out when they look up humanism online and do a little research, they'll find that the views they've always held is a philosophy called humanism.
Was there one specific thing that happened in your life that you can talk to us about where you said, whoa, I am a humanist?
It's not, yes, there is, but it's not so much how I found out I was a humanist, it was how I found out there was a humanist movement. And one of my friends from university, one of my closest friends, was killed about a year after we graduated. She drowned on a boat called the Marchioness on the Thames in London. There was maybe 100 people killed at this party. And there was a big funeral for her, and her parents put on this wonderful event. They invited maybe 100 of her friends, so they were very open in bringing people there. And they had a big ceremony for her at a old religious school that the father had gone to, which was run by monks. And at this ceremony, they talked about this friend of mine, and they asked us all to pray for her soul that was suffering in purgatory for the sins she had committed during her life. And she was the most wonderful person. I mean, very loving, very generous. And the sins that she committed in her life were things I would not consider to be sins. They were things like sleeping with her fiancé and, maybe partying too much. Mm-hmm. But there was nothing she ever did to hurt anyone or do anything wrong. And my reaction to that, people were in tears of sorrow at first, but when they heard her described as someone who was, suffering in purgatory, it turned to tears of anger. And my thought was, if that gives the parents comfort, then who am I to complain? Because when you've lost a daughter, anything that gets you through the night, I wish them well. Mm-hmm. But it got me thinking, what would I do if I wanted to arrange a funeral for my parents, or I wanted to have a wedding? So although I had known I had been non-religious for many years, I had never looked for an organization. I started looking then. I said, I need someone who can conduct a non-religious ceremony when I need it. And that was how I found the Humanists.
Well, thank you very much for all your time and sharing all of that with us. You certainly have us all thinking.
Thank you.
Matt and I will be back to discuss the issues between the Humanists and the United Nations that he's been trying to resolve. And we are back with Matt Cherry. Matt, what is your role at the United Nations?
I lead the Humanist delegation at the United Nations in New York, and that is in the form of the International Humanist and Ethical Union, which is the global umbrella group that represents more than 100 organizations from 40 plus countries around the world.
And more specifically, how are you getting your hands dirty at the United Nations?
Well, the area that I've been very active in is freedom of religion or belief, which is protected by the United Nations. And the United Nations has always been very clear that freedom of religion or belief protects the conscience of all people, whether they're religious or non-religious, whether they believe in God or don't believe in God. And I think it's the one right that protects humanists, not just as human beings, but as humanists in their own philosophy.
You had a major accomplishment recently, and it's centered around the blasphemy resolution. What did you do to make sure that that didn't legally pass? And explain a little bit about what it's all about.
There's been an attempt for the last 10 years or so to pass basically a global law against blasphemy or criticism of religion. And this was passed as a non-binding resolution, which meant it didn't really have any legal teeth, but there was an effort to make it legally binding so that any country who signed up to this would be able to say, if you criticize religion, you can be prosecuted. And we worked on this for many years, and to be honest, the reason we were able to change it and push back is that we started working with the different religious groups in the world. And I think religions at first, many of them thought, this sounds good, they can't criticize religion, that's great. But they eventually realized that their own religious beliefs might be infringed if they couldn't criticize other beliefs. They realized that by banning criticism of religion, you're actually banning a lot of evangelism and attempts to convert people. So once we started working with other religious groups, including very conservative religious groups, we found that we had a lot of influence with countries all over the world, and they were able to stop passing this resolution.
What would have happened had it passed?
If it had passed as a legally binding, then all of the countries that signed up to that would have had basically an obligation to prosecute people for criticizing religion if that criticism offended people's feelings. And offending people's feelings is something that any individual can define, just say, oh, I'm offended by that cartoon or that criticism or by your beliefs. So we were able to stop that. And instead, what happened this year is a resolution was passed that would promote action against religious hatred and incitement to violence, which I think is both more narrowly defined and also something positive that we can all support.
How significant is that?
I think it's very significant. I mean, the idea of of outlawing people's private speech and their own beliefs would have been a huge blow. It would have been the first time that the UN had passed a human rights extension that actually restricted people's rights and freedoms.
What's the hardest part about having a voice at the UN?
I think the hardest part is that we are just one voice amongst many voices. And there are so many strong and very well-funded organizations at the United Nations, so many non-governmental organizations, that it's difficult for the humanist voice to really get a global hearing.
What's next for humanists at the UN level?
What I would like to see happen is for us to bring together all of the other groups that support part of the humanist agenda, whether that's human rights or the environment or the rights of lesbians and gays or the rights of women, and to realize that if we all work together on some issues, we can achieve far more than if we solely focus on those individual areas. Obviously, we have to keep focusing on those areas, but I think a lot more could be achieved if we all came together and worked strategically in support of each other's goals.
Matt, thanks very much for that. There's more, so stay with us.
Humanism has been around for a long time, a lot longer than many of the world's major religions. Humanism is the search for values that human beings can share, and the Humanist Association of Canada promotes that coming together. And part of that effort is this show, Being Human. It will bring you some of the world's leading thinkers on this and a wide range of subjects.
That's being human. From all of us here, thanks for watching. Next week, we'll talk about creationism and evolution and why the gap widens between the two.